الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين، اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين وأعلو برحمتك كلمة الحق والدين. اللهم انصر أهلنا في سوريا يا رب العالمين، اللهم وحد صفهم، اللهم وحد صفهم وثبت أقدامهم. اللهم عليك بأعدائهم وبأعدائنا فإنهم لا يعجزونك. اللهم احصهم عددا وقتلهم أحدا. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. So tonight I'm just going to start by saying a few words about the liberation of Syria. So we're all probably following the news. And I can tell you from my personal perspective, Sheikh Musa for giving a great preamble to that. This is probably, and I'm not exaggerating, the most important event in the history of the Ummah, probably for the past 100 years. And I mean this with all sincerity. And I can explain why in some details, but it's not the scope of it tonight. But I can tell you that this country has lived under a singular family dictatorship for over 50 years, under the oppression of a single party for 60 years, and the amount of atrocities committed by that family on those people, on the people of Syria, the enemies are doing in Gaza or doing on the West Bank. And I say this unequivocally. The amount of torture, destruction, obviously, of entire cities, calling enemies, and, is just unbelievable. And the fact that, mashallah, la quwwata illa billah, the people of Syria had the iman and had the patience to endure the revolution. Does anyone know when the revolution started in Syria? Does anyone know when it started? 2000 then? So people have endured this for 13 years, 13, 14 years, and all they're calling for is basic human rights. Like when you think of it like in American terms, oh, they just want liberation, or they just want freedom. And subhanAllah, when justice prevails and the truth shows, you start to see how weak falsehood is. You saw the collapse of this family and the army and the military intelligence and the soldiers and the weapons. You saw it collapse in a week. In a week. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, قُلْ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ. Malik al-Mulk, you know what that means? Malik al-Mulk means, when we think of mulk in dunya, when we think of things that we own, you own a phone, or you own a bottle of water, or you own a car, or you own a house, that's what we own. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He is the owner of ownership itself. Ownership itself. Everything in the heavens and the earth and the skies and the planets and the moon and the sun and the rain and the rivers and the plants and the seeds and the humans and the animals and the young and the old and the women and the children. And if they ever find aliens living in space, He owns that too. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قُلْ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكَ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِي الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ. Allah grants a very small part of His milk to whoever He wants. He grants you the cell phone, He grants you the book, He grants you the table, He grants you, alhamdulillah, grants the community, the masjid. This is a small part of the milk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says next. وَتَنْزِعَ. What is تنزع? تنزع. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He gives us the milk, you know when He gives something to you, someone gives something to you gently, you give someone a phone gently, right? Versus if a thief takes it from you, if a criminal takes it from you, what do? You grab them and you pull a jiu-jitsu trick on them. You grab them and you punch them in the head and you wrench the phone and you take it out of your hand and you say, that's my phone, that's not yours. This is the word تنزع. تنزع الملك ممن تشاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it. He fled on an airplane. He fled on an airplane to Russia. And today, if you look on Twitter, and maybe the Syrian brothers know this better than I do, I've been getting feeds all day from like, this is the hiding out of the brother. The brother had like a massive underground, place where he escaped, and money and gold and boxes full of guns and things like that. That falls in a second. By the way, this isn't the first time we see this. It happened in Syria with this guy that flew out to Russia. It happened in Tunisia when what they call the Arab, Spring started. Every single one of them. When falsehood falls, it falls easily and quickly. Easily and quickly, in a second. وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ. Someone who thought he'd live forever. This is like the mindset of like Br.Aala and Abu Jahl. And people are like, when they went to the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, they said, one of the mushriks of Mecca, he does an AI trick, for people that are, doing computer science or whatever. And he digs up the dirt and he pulls up bones. And he pulls up bones of that person and he crushes them in his hand. And he says to the Prophet ﷺ in a demeaning way, he says to him, are you saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring back these bones to life? Like he's proving to him that this can never turn into anything. What ayah does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveal after that particular event? وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثَلًا وَنَسِيَ خَلْقَهُ قَالَ مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. He gave us an example, like the guy is giving an example, a scientific experiment. And he said, who will bring these dry bones back to life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah will bring it back in the same way that He created you from nothing. He made the silent flee in an airplane like a coward. So he didn't even go to an Arab country. He had to go to the Russians to grant him asylum. And then you start to see, we could go on, and it's not the topic of tonight. Inshallah, we'll do it another time in more detail. You start to see now the Americans show up, we want to work with you. Oh, we think that that's a fantastic thing. Oh, we'll take you off this list or that list. And now they're like, oh yeah, we'll work with whoever's there. Oh yeah, we don't have a problem. And then of course the enemy of all time, it's an opportunity. If you're a thief of land, what do? You go steal more land. If you're a thief of land, that's what you do. Oh, we're going to, the Israelis today said, we're not going to consider, listen to this, the 1974 agreement valid anymore. It's as if they've done nothing since 1974. It's as if like, we've been great guys since 1974. We've done nothing to the Syrians, but today we will. So today we're going to take over the land up until the official ceasefire. But you see the nifaq. You see that. Now let me just fast forward to just two more data points, and we could talk about this for hours. One thing that we should know, my brothers and sisters, if you look at the events, especially of the last year and a bit, we were on highs and lows, which is normal. As an ummah, we were on highs and lows, right? Going on highs and lows. But the last few months have been especially tough. That was like we're approaching 50,000 people killed in Gaza that we know of. We're seeing a massive carpet bombing campaign that has effectively destroyed 80% of housing. No more hospitals are functioning. Food hasn't been getting in, by the way, for 17 years. This isn't new. But now absolutely nothing is getting in, right? And then you start to see the peace with this group or that group, and you go like, where is this going to go? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flips that on its head in a week. In arguably the most meaningful country of what's called Bilad al-Sham today. Syria has always been the power. The Prophet ﷺ has a hadith. What does he say? Allahumma barik lana, complete the hadith. في شأننا وفي يمننا. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give this ummah barakah in its Sham and its Yemen. Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu, we'll talk about him next time in more detail. When he liberated Bayt al-Maqdis, when the Muslim army went to Bayt al-Maqdis, where did that get launched from? From Bilad al-Sham, from Syria. It launched from the actual campaign preparation happened in Syria. When Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi defeated the Crusaders, how did that sequence of events happen? It started off first by an uncle called Ahmad ad-Din al-Zinki, liberating exactly like what happened today, Damascus. Salah ad-Din then was able to go around in the Imarat that were munafiqeen and liars and followers of the Crusades that had occupied Jerusalem, clean them up before he was able to liberate it. The path that you see today, wallahi, my brothers and sisters, is the same path that you've seen across history through the liberty of the whole of Bilad al-Sham, inshallah. I'm just going to say one last thing. And like I said, next time we'll talk in more detail. So I'm going to give you a preview of next week. I'm going to do a special, because it's the time to talk about him, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. Tonight we're going to talk about his Islam. Next we're going to talk about Mu'tah and give as much as we can. His biography goes on for hours and hours and hours, but we'll try to summarize in 45 minutes or so the key accomplishments. We all know that when the Muslims showed up on the scene, they were a small ragtag group of fighters and Arabs that were way behind the Persian civilization and the Roman civilization. We know this. We know that Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid, in his effort to liberate, especially Faris, which was the dominant superpower at the time, he went from the south of what is today Kuwait. Kuwait was actually his first time on the scene against the Persians, all the way to the north of the Euphrates, right? He smashes up the Persian Empire, so much so that the Persian Empire, that had been arch enemies of the Roman Empire. We spoke about this last time with the letter to Heraclius and how he came to about, if you remember. That's why these elements of history are important. That's why the intersection of Islam in the middle is so important for us to understand as an ummah. He smashes them up so badly. He defeats the Romans and the Persians that what do they do at the end? Does anyone know what they do? They create a peace. The Romans and the Persians that are arch enemies create a peace to fight who? These Arabs that are now coming from the desert, these new Muslims that are coming from the desert. He was outnumbered, he was outgunned. The Arabs didn't have the money, and they certainly didn't have the technology. Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu and the Muslims wrecked the two major superpowers of the time in 1 year. Think about that. This is called Nasr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the Quran. It's not up to us in the balance of dunya to say, oh, they'll never succeed. Oh, what do they have that's going to make them? Oh, look, the Israelis did. Oh, look, the Americans did. Oh, look. That's not the equation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. That's called Iman. When we think of ourselves as Muslims, the number one characteristic we should have is Iman and Taqwa. And these brothers and sisters in Syria have demonstrated it again and again and again. And this is the outcome that we see. Takbir. 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 Okay, and one last thing, that's not the lecture of tonight. You saw that when the Shaykh was praying Isha, I don't know if you noticed, he was very hungry. And his stomach was rumbling. So there's a cake in the back in celebration of Syria. Okay? I brought this. I'd like for you to share. Allah, it's sitting right in the back, and there's plates and there's help yourself. I don't want to get the masjid dirty, but please help yourself right there. Chocolate cake. You guys in the back can start. Yeah, you two guys, youngest in the crew. So please, okay. So please bring it. Please share. We'll start inshallah tonight. Okay? Deal? Yalla, bismillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi man walatum amma ba'd. Okay, where are we in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Sending letters. Okay, sending letters to the Prophet, sending letters to the other leaders and the kings. And we talked about various examples of that. Tonight, we're going to talk about Umrat al-Qada. We're going to keep it short, but tonight's going to be very meaningful because we're going to talk about some very famous ahadith that we know, some very famous fiqh rulings that we know that actually happened around the time of Umrat al-Qada. And we'll close off with the Islam of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu. So in the 7th year of Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ, by the way, was sending letters. When you read the books of Seerah, depending on like how it's organized, they will typically put it in its own chapter. But it doesn't mean that the Prophet ﷺ did it and stopped. He was always doing it, right? Some of these letters were sent after Fath Makkah. In fact, last time we talked about the leaders of Oman, they were sent after Fath Makkah, right? Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ now goes with 2,000 of the companions radiallahu anhum to go to Mecca to do the Umrah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised him in which surah? Surah Al-Fath, which page? 4th page, left-hand side at the bottom, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, لَتَدْخُلُنَّ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ. جزاكم الله خير حبيبي, الله يحفظك يا رب. Hey, the brother wants me to wreck my diet. Okay, so can someone handle the chocolate cake, please? Because it's going to be hard for me to talk and cut cake at the same time. So the Prophet ﷺ marches. Where does he make ihram? Where does the Prophet ﷺ make ihram? This should be an easy question for everyone who made the Umrah before from Medina. Huh? Dhul Hulayfa, right? When you leave Medina, you stop in a place called Dhul Hulayfa, and the Prophet ﷺ makes it ihram from there, and they continue and they take their hadi with them. Remember, we talked about last time, the hadi is decorated, and there's now, mashallah, 2,000 companions with the Prophet ﷺ. 2,000 companions with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And they get to Mecca. We're going to fast forward a little bit. They get to Mecca, and the Meccans get up, of course, and they meet them with a delegation. And I would call this an unwelcome delegation, not a welcome delegation. And they look at him and they say, hey, you brought all the heavy weaponry. So they came with weapons. Remember last time they said they don't bring weapons? They came with really big weapons this time. And they had them loaded up on a truck. Let's just say on a truck. Like they had a caravan, they had a little. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I agree. There will be no weapons in Mecca. We're taking this, we're going to leave this outside of Mecca until we come to do our Umrah. And you can see how the Prophet ﷺ is taking his care from a potential ambush or a betrayal from the Quraysh, right? Like we're not supposed to be gullible, we're supposed to watch out for ourselves. The Muslims now go in, and I wanted to just spend a moment on this. I want you to think about the fact that the Muslims go in Umrah al-Qada, and they're doing the Umrah, and they're making the talbiyah of Islam for the first time ever since the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is the first time for centuries that actual Muslims are making the Umrah on the Kaaba. Think of how amazing that is. Think of how amazing that is. Now, remind me, what's the other part of the deal that we just made with the Mushrikeen last year, right? That what are the Muslims going to do when they're making Umrah? What are the Quraysh going to do? They're going to leave the city, take an Airbnb, right? Go take an Airbnb and stay outside. So that's what the Quraysh do. The Quraysh go out, they leave the city, and they take an Airbnb, and they're looking at the Muslims. They're looking at the Muslims in shock. The Quraysh, especially the ones that have extreme hatred for the Muslims, they're making the tawaf around the Kaaba, and the Mushrikeen are furious at what they see. But they're amazed at the level of commitment and dedication. One of the most positive ways in which we can affect non-Muslims is when they see us do the prayer at the masjid. I may have said the story before. There's this lady in Seattle. She was like a big Islamophobe. She's a local Seattle person. And one time she came to MAPS. This is probably like 7-8 years ago in Ramadan. And she's in the back, like, we have all these tables. She's in the back like this. You know those people that are like, show me. Tell me what you have to tell me. I don't believe anybody. Anyway, right? She was one of those. Then afterwards, she didn't want to really talk to anyone either. She showed up though. She came. Afterwards, she writes an article. And she says her tone changed completely. So the most moving thing to me about going to this masjid for the first time is when, like you tell her she's fasting, like, okay, that's interesting. Okay, you break. Is when the time of Adhan came and everyone broke their fast together. And then what did people do? They went and they prayed Jama'ah. And when she saw that really moved her. She was an Islamophobe, right? This is what happened to many people of the Quraysh. This is what happened. They're like these people are really committed. These people are really committed to their deen. I may disagree with them, but they're very committed to their deen. And so some of the groups stayed in their homes and didn't leave. Some congregated in the parliament, and some left the city, and those are the ones that are overlooking from the hills. And they camped out for 3 days. Then some of the Islamophobes, you can imagine who, started to create rumors. They said, hey, the Muslims are sick. The Muslims have been stricken with this Medina, man, that's a dirty place. There are lots of diseases in Medina. Some presidents here, say Africa, like it's that kind of attitude, right? Medina's a dirty place, they're all sick. That's why they're not eating. Look how skinny he is. Look, he wasn't like that when he was in Mecca. Those kinds of rumors, right? And the Prophet ﷺ then, when he heard this, and now we're going to learn a lesson in how the Prophet ﷺ teaches us to apply PR for Islam. Like, when we teach others, we have to have smart PR. No, brother, we should not. No, take it. Do PR. That's part of your dawah. Part of your dawah is your PR. How do you represent your deen? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ said, told the Muslims a few things. Number one, raise your voices with talbiyah. Right? This is where the sunnah comes from. So whenever you're going to Hajj, you're going to Umrah, and you see someone in the bus going, like, dude, that's not how you're supposed to do it. Okay. But by the way, when is another time to raise your voice? Sunnah to raise your voice. Because generally that's not the case, right? Generally we don't sit and yell at each other. But when is another time when it's sunnah to raise your voice? Celebration. Eid. Takbirat al-Eid. Why did the Prophet ﷺ say raise your voice in Takbirat al-Eid? Why? Why is it sunnah to do it in an open? That's the sunnah, right? Is it in a convertible? We're supposed to do it in like how Baqi Masjid does it, mashallah. Why is that the sunnah? Because the takbir lets others know that there's a group of committed Muslims here and throws fear into the hearts of the enemies. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, bring the women, even the ones that can't pray, to the Eid prayer and let them do the takbir, let them take the benefit of the dua. So that the whole ummah is gathered together for unity during the time of. So the Prophet ﷺ said, raise your voices in talbiyah. Number two, expose your right shoulder. This is the first time in history it's ever happened in tawaf. So when you go to tawaf, what do? Expose your right shoulder, right? And part of it is to show them what? That you have biceps, mashallah, like Brother Jafar. It's to show you're clean of disease. Well, you may have biceps, alhamdulillah, like Brother Jafar. But it's to show that you're clean of disease. We don't have disease. Even though we're into Medina, we're all good, right? So that's the second thing the Prophet ﷺ teaches. The third thing that he teaches the Muslims is to make raml. Raml in the first, 3 of what is raml? Yeah, it's a march. It's a march. Like the sheikhs are like walking fast or accelerating walk. Now, it's not really possible to do this today. You'll understand if you go make tawaf around the Kaaba. If you make raml, mashallah, you're a big person. You're going to overrun the people in front of you, right? So we can't really do that today, but raml is also part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which comes from countering the Quraysh rumors of the sickness of the Muslims, right? It's like a brisk walk. Okay. And so, like I said, I just want you to picture this, that this is a momentous occasion for the Muslims, and this is really an inferiority complex for the mushriks, and at the same time raising the confidence of the Muslims and how they're making the Umrah with the Prophet ﷺ. It's a true deflation of the Quraysh. It has an image of strength, positivity, and like I said, we learn from this in the case of PR in our case. Okay, there's really not a lot that the books of Seerah say about what happened in those 3 days of Umrah, right? There's not a lot. We'll go into what is mentioned. And the Prophet ﷺ then swaps. So the people, he leaves 200 men outside guarding the caravan of the weapons, and he does a swap. He takes them off ship. They come and make Umrah. He sends another group of men to stand outside guarding the weapons that they brought with them, that they left outside of the Haram. The one event that occurs is that Al-Abbas radiallahu anhu told the Prophet ﷺ to marry al-Mu'mineen, fill in the blank, last one he married. Last one. We went through this a couple times. Maymuna bint al-Harith radiallahu anha. So Al-Abbas radiallahu anhu was married to al-Fadl, and he says to her, al-Fadl is the sister of Maymuna. Her husband, Maymuna's husband, had passed away, and she is interested in marrying the Prophet ﷺ, right? So Al-Abbas approaches the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet agrees to marry Maymuna radiallahu anha. By the way, she's the last of Ummahat al-Mu'mineen to die. She's the very last of the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen to die. There's an area about this in which surah? The marriage of Maymuna specifically. Surah Al-Ahzab, mashallah. Al-Ahzab is the big marriage with the Prophet ﷺ. Surah Al-Ahzab specifically the ayah وَامْرَأَةً مُؤْمِنَةً وَهَبَتْ نَفْسَهَا لِلنَّبِيِّ إِنْ أَرَادَ النَّبِيُّ أَنْ يَسْتَنْكِحَهَا خَالِصَةً لَكَ مِنْ دُونِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. This part of the ayah specifically refers to Maymuna radiallahu anha, right? This is a special rule for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This doesn't apply to us. When we have to get married, we have to pay the mahr, we have to have the wali. But when she came willingly to the Prophet ﷺ, he does not have to pay mahr. Now, let me tell you where there's a little bit, if you ever read books of seerah, especially different books of seerah, this hadith is mentioned, so I have to say it. Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, he says the Prophet ﷺ married Maymuna at the time that he was making the Umrah, and some people thought that they meant what the Prophet ﷺ was in ihram, which is not allowed in Islam, as we know, right? Maymuna radiallahu anha has at least 4 or 5 authentic hadith that describe the marriage. She says this didn't happen. He married her outside of ihram after he left, and this is where the actual marriage ceremony and contracted marriage occurred. When the 3 days were up, the Prophet ﷺ went to the Quraysh because they didn't want to. The leaders are not going to go talk to him. They feel now like they have egg on their face or whatever. So they sent someone to speak to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, who takes the message to the Prophet ﷺ. It's like, hey, your time is up. Yalla, bismillah. We don't want you here anymore. The deal we had was 3 days. You got your 3 days. And the Prophet ﷺ went to them and he said, can't you, like, let me stay an extra few days. He's from Mecca, remember. The Prophet ﷺ feels like he's back in his hometown. Let me stay for an extra few days. Why would it hurt you? And then he says to them, in fact, I got married. I'll have my walima, and I'll invite you all. Look at the generosity of the Prophet ﷺ. I'll invite you to my walima, right? And subhanAllah, and they said no. They said, لا حاجة لنا في طعامك. I was just remembering yesterday, and I really admire this brother, the Syrian leader who came and said, don't destroy any of the city, don't kill any of the people, don't shoot up the government buildings, don't do this, don't do that. If you followed some of the short lectures that were given, wallahi, many of it has the best examples of the manners of Islam. Best examples, right? So the Prophet ﷺ says, come and eat. They're like, we don't want to eat. Like, so, khalas. The Prophet ﷺ marries Maymuna in a place called Sarif, which is on the way back to Medina. So it's a pit stop on the way back to Medina. And this is where she dies later. She dies at the same place that the Prophet ﷺ married her. Maymuna dies in Sarif at 61 after Hijrah. Okay. The results of this particular Umrah are the tides have completely changed. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that it's allowable to renegotiate a treaty with the enemy, but he told them when he was in Mecca, hey, let me stay for a few days. They're the ones that rejected. He also teaches us how to soften the hearts, and one of the best ways to do that is what? This is the most generous ummah. The most generous ummah is this ummah. Which other ummah can come over to my house? Whatever I have, I'll bring out to you. Which other ummah does this? Which other ummah does this? You go speak to anyone from any place. How many people are coming? Oh, I want to make sure I have enough salad. This is the most generous ummah on the planet. And part of how we make our dua, subhanAllah, is through the generosity, through the food. By the way, chocolate cake is still sitting there, so I don't know if you guys expect it to cut itself or what's going to happen, right? Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us about this, how to warm up the hearts and minds. On the way out, this is now a fiqh ruling. On the way out of Medina, Brother Jafar, you don't have to do it. Don't worry. I'm going to leave it. Eat it later. I want you to come and listen. No, I want you to come and listen. Leave it. Okay, we have a volunteer. Bismillah, mashallah. Okay. So, on the way out of Medina, the Prophet ﷺ is called out by a very young girl. By most of books of seerah, she's 6 to 7 years old. Does anyone know who this young girl is? Hamza's daughter, mashallah alayk. She's an orphan. And the Prophet ﷺ is leaving Mecca, and she calls and she says, Ya ammi, ya am. Calls her to the Prophet ﷺ, like, uncle, I want to go back to Medina with you. I don't want to stay in Mecca. She's feeling like she's seen her 6 or 7 years old. Look at how perceptions change even of young children. I want to go back to Mecca with you. And her name is Umara bint Hamza. So she is the daughter of Hamza. Hamza, radiallahu anhu, was married amongst the other marriages to a woman in Mecca, and they have this little girl. And where's Hamza now? In Jannah. He's a shaheed in Uhud, inshallah, right? Okay. So, like, don't worry, like, I don't always ask trick questions. Sometimes I do, but most of my questions are straightforward. Okay, alhamdulillah. So Hamza is divorced his wife, and and they take her back to Medina with him, and a very interesting situation happens. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the one that takes her, and when he goes back to Medina, he gives her to his wife. What's his wife's name? Fatima. Oh, and you guys are concerning me tonight. You guys are really, better hurry up with the chocolate cake, man. I think, okay. So he is fine. He says to Fatima, take care of her. We're going to take her and we're going to take care of her. And Zayd ibn Thabit comes over and he says, no. Zayd ibn Thabit says, you're absolutely not going to take care of her. Hamza was my brother. When the Prophet ﷺ made mu'akha, he's like, the Prophet ﷺ made mu'akha, but he's my brother. So I am next in line to take care of her, not you. What are you to her? I'm Hamza's brother. And Ja'far ibn Abi Talib sees this. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib was who? Ali's brother, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, both of them from the Abi Talib clan. And where did he just come back from? What long trip was he just on? Abyssinia. Remember what happened after Khaybar? So he just came back. And he's like, neither of you is going to take her. Neither of you is going to take her. I'm the one that's going to take her. I'm the one that's going to take her. So they're now fighting over who's going to care for Umara bint Hamza, right? And everyone is bringing forward a logical argument why they're the most befitting to take care of her. And he says to them, not only am I the same degree of relationship as Ali radiallahu anhu, he's his brother, Ali radiallahu anhu, we're brothers, but also my wife is her aunt. My wife is her aunt, right? And the Prophet, and they get into like a heated argument. I just want to pause for a second. You know how people say, Muslims are against women, Muslims put women's rights down, blah, blah, blah. You know that story that's, subhanAllah. The easiest way to disprove that, especially to people in America, is I tell them, listen, man, look, I don't know what you know about Christianity or Judaism, but let me just explain something to you that when we do as Muslims, when we get married, the first thing we don't do is we don't change the woman's name. You know where that comes from? Let me educate you a little bit about your history. It comes from the fact that in Judaism, in Judeo-Christian tradition, as you call it here, a woman was considered property. A woman is considered property in actually their fiqh, their corrupted fiqh. And so when she got married, everything about her was erased, including her name. This is where this comes from in the Western world. Many people don't know this. See, the problem is they don't know their own history. They don't know their own deen, right? So her identity is erased. In traditional classical Judaic faith, what she owns, if she's the daughter of a millionaire and she gets married to a junkie, he now takes over her property. In fact, in further Jewish tradition, if the husband dies, you know who takes her over? The brother. If the husband has a brother, he takes over. We don't have any of this in Islam. So I'm saying this because you just went from a Jahili custom where 14, 15, 20 years ago they were burying the girls to now they're fighting over who's going to take care of her. You see how Islam changes? Like this argumentation that occurred between the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, you see how Islam elevates the status of women. Because then Jahili tells everyone, the girl, you keep her. I'm not keeping her. She would have been lucky to survive. You understand? So the Prophet ﷺ comes to fix the dispute. And look at not just the manners, but the genius of Muhammad ﷺ. Genius of Muhammad ﷺ. He comes and he doesn't want to upset any of them. Like he wants to encourage them all, he doesn't want to upset any of them. So he comes to Ali radiallahu anhu and he says, and I should have brought the Arabic hadith, but let's just keep it short. He says, "Anta minni wa ana minka." He says, like, you're from me and I'm from you, man. You're married to my daughter. You're married from my daughter. Like this is our relation. This is how much I love you. And then he says to Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu, he says, "Anta akhuna wa mawlana." He says, you're my brother and you're the one that I seek help from. Right? Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu. And then he says to Ja'far radiallahu anhu, he says, you resemble me the most, both in terms of physically and in manners. Remember, Ja'far radiallahu anhu was much older than Ali radiallahu anhu. Ja'far radiallahu anhu was closer to the age of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ali was a young boy compared to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a very famous hadith, which is now the fiqhi ruling of this. And what does he say? Al-khala fi manzilat al-um. So the Prophet ﷺ said the person that should get her is Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, since the aunt takes over the status of the mother when the mother passes away, right? So the maternal aunt, not the paternal aunt, right? Now, for those of you that really want to, we're not going to go deep in fiqh, but let me just say this. There's 3 opinions that it's the khala, and there's 1 opinion that's the amma. What would be the opinion of the amma? So the predominant majority of the khala is the khala. This is hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Why would you say one of the khala said it's the amma? This is not a, like, this is a trick question. Okay. Because the amma is the only one that can inherit. The khala doesn't inherit. So that school of fiqh said it's the amma, but based on the inheritance. And then they responded to them and they said, yes, but there's a difference between custody and inheritance. So custody of a child really goes to the khala, even though the amma can inherit, right? So I just thought I would raise this because this is a very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. Now we're going to close off with the famous people that accepted Islam as a result of this Umrah, right? As a result of Umrah al-Khattab. We'll talk first about Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. And Amr ibn al-As narrates this long hadith about himself. It's wonderful because he's talking about how he felt, right? So he says, after Khandaq, I started to go what's going on? Like Khandaq, for them to understand, was a sure thing. Like, we're going to finish them off. There's not going to be anyone left in Gaza. They're going to stop fighting in a week. They're going to stop fighting in 2 weeks. This was Khandaq for them, right? And he said, what would happen if Muhammad ﷺ took over? What would happen if he took over? So I love it because describing his thoughts. He says, well, I guess I could go stay and live with the Romans. And then he goes on, he's like, but I concluded that I didn't want to go live with the Romans. I don't speak the language. I would have to change my clothes and my traditions. I don't want to stop being who I am, right? So he says, well, I thought about Najashi. Najashi, remember, is a friend of Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As is the diplomat, the politician of Quraysh, preeminent diplomat and politician. So he says, I can go and stay with Najashi, and I could just wait and see. He's like, that's a pretty good opinion. So he gathers a group of his friends, he goes to them one at a time. He says, guys, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We got the situation going on with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why don't we just go to Najashi and watch from a distance? We'll watch it on TV. If he wins, if he loses, we'll come back. We're all good with the Quraysh, So he goes to Najashi. At the time that he goes to Najashi, and now you see the intersection of Sirah, which is beautiful. The Prophet ﷺ has sent to Najashi a companion called Amr ibn Ubayyah al-Dumari with a message. And the message says, send back Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and the initial Muhajirin. So before Khaybar, remember the Prophet ﷺ asked him to come back? He sends it through a letter to Najashi through this companion. Amr ibn al-As finds out about the presence of this Muslim companion in Abyssinia. And then he just went and he spoke to the king. So he goes to meet with the king. By the way, Amr ibn al-As again is a very smart diplomat, very smart politician. When you have people like US presidents go to Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi Arabians are, I shouldn't mention countries, but let's just say a very rich country wants to get favor with them, what do? They give them treasure chests, and this is super precious gold, this, just take care of me. I just want to make sure, you know what I mean? Okay. So this is what he does. He brings with him camel leather. And Najashi loved camel leather. Mecca was known for camel leather. It's if you're going to eat pasta, you're going to have Italian pasta. He brings him that highest level of camel leather from Mecca. And he goes into Najashi. And by the way, does anyone know how he used to salute Najashi? He used to make sujood. So he goes in, he makes sujood to Najashi. And he says, I brought with you, O great king, wonderful gifts. And he opens up the oil treasure chests from Mecca, right? And Najashi is happy. He's visibly happy that he brought him this stuff, right? And Amr ibn al-As in essence says to him, hey, that guy that just came from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad is a big enemy of ours, and we're very bitter. And I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind us killing that guy. That's essentially what he says to the king. And Najashi radiallahu anhu is infuriated. He, when people respectfully say they just lost it, Najashi loses it. And in the books of Sirah, Amr is the one narrating this hadith. He says he hit his nose. You know how in some traditions, people go, what? They have some motion that indicates a high degree of anger, right? A high degree of the Maoris of New Zealand. I don't know if anyone knows who the Maoris are in New Zealand, but Sheikh knows who the Maoris are because he watches rugby. So of course he knows them. The Maoris, I used to live in Australia, so Australia and New Zealand are considered like one country, right? We don't have Maoris in Australia, but have no. Anyway, when you as a foreign dignitary to the Maoris of New Zealand, they have a tradition, right? Which is they do this war dance in front of you up until now. And you have to stand firm that you're not afraid of the war dance, right? And then, and between each other, the way they salute each other is they rub the noses. The men go and they rub the nose, like, you know how we hug? There's things that, so every tradition, every culture has its own thing. So in his culture, Najashi, you hit the nose. I don't know exactly how he did it, but Amr radiallahu anhu says, he hit his nose so hard, I thought he broke it. I thought he broke his own nose because, and he says, I became very afraid of him. Very afraid. And Najashi says to him, he says, Ya Amr, Amr starts to apologize profusely that he even made this request. I'm sorry, King. I didn't know it would bother you. I didn't know you'd be this upset. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. And the king calms down eventually, and he says to him, he says, Ya Amr, he says, Wayhaka ya Amr. He says, like Amr, wake up to yourself. He says, listen, we're not just like, I'm a king and you're nothing, but we're also good friends. Okay? So he says, I'm going to give you some advice. This man has come with the truth. He basically says to them, you want me to kill the messenger of the messenger that the Namus al-Akbar. You guys remember that term? Who used that term in Namus al-Akbar before? Waraq ibn Nawfal. Waraq ibn Nawfal. Remember the very famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? He says in Namus al-Akbar, the great angel that comes down. Are you telling me you want me to kill the messenger of the messenger in which the great angel goes down as a messenger? Like, are you crazy? And then he says to him, Amr, listen to me. He says, this man is the actual messenger. It would be good for you to believe in him. Amr ibn al-As says that word from Najashi is the one that completely converted him to Islam. And he actually says to him, I would like to make my bay'ah, my la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to you. Would that be okay? And Najashi says yes. So effectively, Amr is already 90% Muslim by that time. 90% Muslim. I'm now going to give you a question. I'm not going to ask you the question. I'm going to give you a question to put in a quiz that people won't be able to answer. And here's you already know the answer. The question is, you put this on a quiz, seriously. Which tabi'i made da'wah to a sahabi and the sahabi accepted Islam? This is it. Why is Najashi considered a tabi'i and not a sahabi? He never met the Prophet ﷺ. The definition of a sahabi is you had to have met the Prophet ﷺ at least once. But by the way, just out of curiosity, I will ask you this question now on a quiz. Do you know when was so if we're doing a statistical curve on data science, when was the maximum number of Sahaba that became Sahaba? What was the event? Sahaba that actually became Sahaba. Hajjatul Wada, mashallah. Hajjatul Wada. Hajjatul Wada, they came from everywhere. And everyone wanted to meet the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So Najashi never met the Prophet ﷺ. So Amr now says, I basically, he's like, and subhanAllah, this is, by the way, one of the lessons we learn from this is like, sometimes you're speaking to someone, someone goes to them, hey brother, can you come with me I want to talk to this person, and they've gone astray, or they're not hearing me, they're not listening to me. It's not that you're doing anything wrong, but sometimes communication helps when it's from someone else. He said, hey, Sheikh Musa, come and help me with this kid. He's gone, but he'll listen to him, he won't listen to me. This happens a lot. And this is completely valid, right? So Amr radiallahu anhu says, I made the bay'ah to Najashi, I went back to Mecca, and I meet now the leaders of the Quraysh, and he tells them, hey, I'm packed up, I'm traveling. His companion's like, where are you going? I'm going back to meet my family and this and that. But he actually sneaks out and he wants to go to Medina to accept Islam. And on his way back, he meets Khalid ibn Walid and Uthman ibn Talha radiallahu anhum, and they're like, we are going to accept Islam. Does anyone know the word of Khalid ibn Walid, what he says to Amr ibn al-As? They're very good friends. He says, Istaban al-Amr. What does Istaban al-Amr means? It's clear and it's settled. Like the matter is settled for me. So Khalid says, he says, it's settled for me. I have no more doubts now. This man is the actual prophet. I'm actually going to him in Medina. I'm going to accept Islam in Medina, right? And this batch of men, Khalid ibn Walid, Amr ibn al-As, Uthman ibn Talha radiallahu anhu, are the last batch of Meccans to have accepted Islam in Medina with the Prophet ﷺ before Fath Makkah. Before Fath Makkah, right? You all know the ayah in the Quran. لا يستوي من أنفق من قبل وقاتل أولئك أعظم درجة من الذين أنفقوا من بعد وقاتلوا وكلا وعد الله حسنى والله بما تعملون خبير. Surah Hadid, the second page at the bottom, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this particular event and these groups of individuals. Obviously, it applies to all the Sahaba also before them, but like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, they're not equal. They're not equal. The ones that accepted Islam before the Fath of Mecca was much harder for them to make sacrifices, to leave their families, to leave their wealth, to do this, to be challenged by their communities. The ones that accepted after the Fath. They're not equal, right? Okay. So they go to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, he accepts Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ extends his hand to Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As. And the books of Sirah say he did one of two things. First, he extended his hand and he retracted it, and then another narration says he didn't grab the hand of the Prophet ﷺ, he grabbed over his sleeve. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Manakam, like, what's wrong with you? and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I'm only going to accept Islam on one condition. And the Prophet ﷺ says, what condition is this? And Amr al-As says, and you know what he says? All my previous sins be forgiven. All my previous sins, like, this is what you can tell Islam is in someone's heart. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Ya Amr, ألا تعلم أن الإسلام يجب ما قبله وأن الهجرة تجب ما قبلها وأن الحج يجب ما كان قبله. So the Prophet ﷺ, another very famous hadith about tawbah, forgiveness of sins, the Prophet ﷺ lays down three foundations based on question of Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As of complete forgiveness. One is that someone enters into Islam, and that's what we say to the convert brothers and sisters that come in. It's like, you're now on a fresh page in your life, right? Or the second is the hijrah. No, we can't do the hijrah, right? So we first doesn't apply, second doesn't apply. The third one, alhamdulillah, applies to us. So we still have one hanging on, which is to make Hajj, inshallah. Okay. Khalid ibn Walid, let's talk about him for a second and his Islam. He's from the tribe of Banu Makhzum. So his last name is Khalid ibn Walid ibn al-Mughira, right? So, and Banu Makhzum also, what's the other leader of Banu Makhzum? So his father is from the Banu Makhzum leadership, Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl is the other. Abu Jahl is also from the Banu Makhzum, right? So Banu Makhzum has a Walid, and the other two tribes are Banu Umayyah and Banu Hashim, right? From the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, Abu Talib is from the Banu Hashim, right? Okay. So, and by the way, Al-Walid bin Mughira, the father of Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, wasn't just a super rich businessman and politician and so forth, but he was the Quraysh, fill in the blank, poet. That's why, if you remember, in early Mecca, when the Quran started to come down and they could do nothing against it, they would send him. They said, you go and you speak to this man. You go and you put him down. You make sure you defeat him in this Quran that he's coming down with, right? And there's very famous hadith, the top of it is beautiful, the bottom of it is fertile. When he hears the Quran, he comes back, and every time he comes back, they're like, you loser. We sent you to break him, not to come back and to commend him, right? And then they send him back again, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, this is a question now for you, where does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describe the father of Khalid ibn Walid in his house as he's coming up with a scheme to put down what the Prophet ﷺ is saying? إنه فكر وقدر فقتل كيف قدر ثم قتل كيف قدر ثم نظر ثم عبس وبصر ثم أدبر واستكبر فقال إن هذا إلا سحر يؤثر. This whole Quran is in the passage of the father of Khalid ibn Walid, that he schemed, that he thought and he plotted in his own house. And at the end, the only thing he could come up with is what? He's a magician. That was his best trick. He's a magician, right? And this is the life of Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid ibn Walid, by the way, was also brought up in a lap of what we call today a lap of luxury, right? He grew up first class, mashallah. He learned chivalry and he learned horseback riding and he learned fighting as a young man. He learned all these things, and when they went to Khandaq, he also started to change his mind. Remember, even militarily, Khalid radiallahu anhu, did he participate in Badr? No, he didn't participate in Badr. He was on a business mission, right? So that's the reason why he didn't show up in Badr. In Uhud, he's the reason, quote unquote, for what happened, right? And Khandaq, he's the only one with a small division of horses that actually got across the Khandaq, almost made it to Medina, and then it was pushed back when he was surrounded. He's the only guy that made it through. He turns around, where's the rest of the team? No one's here. I might as well head back, otherwise I'm going to get killed, right? He's the only one. So he's already experienced these things, and he knows he's smart. Like, this is his area of specialization. Because after Khandaq, I started to kind of think about this, and and he says, when Allah wanted good for me, He started to put the love of Islam in my heart after Khandaq, and I sensed that Muhammad ﷺ will be victorious. And in Abasan, he remembers another one. What happened in Abasan? This was the Umrah. The Prophet ﷺ went, not Umrah al-Qada, the year before. And he said, I went to challenge them. Remember? And what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He outmaneuvered him. He took a different path and he came from his flank. He said, even in Abasan, I couldn't believe it. And then he remembers something else. He said, in Abasan, I thought I knew exactly when to kill them. Which was what? When they're going to pray. When they're going to pray. When they're going to pray, right? And he says to I told my companions, I've got this. We're going to get them now. When they come to pray, we'll finish them off. And so suddenly they come up with this new tactic. A group is praying, a group is defending themselves. It's like, that wasn't part of my plan. I didn't understand what just happened, right? So he remembers not just what happened in his heart, but even militarily some of the encounters that he couldn't explain. He couldn't explain. And he says, it's as if he knew what I was thinking. In the hadith of Khalid ibn Walid, he says, it's as if he knew what I was thinking. And he says, I knew he was protected. Has anyone, by the way, said this before about the Prophet ﷺ? I knew he was protected. Very famous hadith. فَظَنَنْتُ أَنَّهُمَا مَمْنُوعَانِ Suraqa ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. Suraqa, remember when he chases after them in the desert and his horse keeps falling and then he surrenders to them. Right? He surrenders to them. So he says, I knew they were protected. Okay. So then he says, what am I going to do? Go to Abyssinia? He has the same thought process as Amr ibn al-As. So I don't want to go to Abyssinia. After the Umrah al-Qada, his brother leaves him a letter. His brother writes him a letter and leaves it in Mecca, like delivered this to Khalid radiallahu anhu, right? When did his brother accept Islam? Badr, after Badr, he was captured as a prisoner, remember? And Khalid ibn Walid is the one that goes to pay the ransom. 4,000 dirham, massive amount of money. Like $4 million to take his brother back. His brother sees what the Muslims do. He takes the Shahada secretly, but he still wants the Muslims to get paid. He goes out with Khalid ibn Walid, and then they come to a pit stop. They stay at the motel. He gets up while no one is watching him, and he goes back to Medina. Khalid is furious at his brother, right? So he leaves him a letter. And he says to him, the Prophet ﷺ is asking about you. He's asking about you. And he said, how can someone with the intellect of Khalid ibn Walid not accept Islam and not know that this is the true deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he says, the Prophet ﷺ says, he actually says, for how long will you not accept it? So the brother is asking, for how long will you not accept Islam? And then he says, the Prophet ﷺ says, if he were to put his talents with us, we will honor him over others. So the Prophet ﷺ says to the brother to say this, so Khalid ibn Walid decides to do something very strange. He takes the opinion of some of the big mushriks of Mecca. He calls Safwan ibn Umayyah, and he calls Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Like they're his friends, but they're like from the leaders of the Quraysh, and most of them got killed in Badr. Like they're furious already with the whole situation, right? So Safwan ibn Umayyah, his father, brother died in Badr. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl starts to panic and yell at him. Like you can imagine, like two friends now. He's like screaming at the top of his lungs, middle of the night. People start to wake up. What's going on? Other leaders come, and swords were actually pulled out. They were almost going to kill Khalid radiallahu anhu, and Ikrimah is the one that defends him. He says, listen, I'm angry at him, but not to the point where I wanted to kill him. I don't want to kill him. Yeah, if he thinks differently, let him think differently. I'm angry at how he's thinking, but I don't want to kill him for that. And Ikrimah radiallahu anhu was really shocked at the time. He kind of diffused the situation, and Khalid radiallahu anhu says, I can't stay here. So in the middle of that night, he leaves, right? He starts his journey. And Uthman ibn Talha radiallahu anhu now is with him, so the three of them meet up, and they go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Uthman ibn Talha, does anyone know this person? Let's close with this one. Why is he very important? So remember the tribes of Quraysh, which tribe is he from? Bani Abd ad-Dar. Do you know the poetry? The poetry that what's her name? Sorry, huh? Hind was reciting in Badr and Uhud. Was it mentions these tribes. Bani Abd ad-Dar is one of them. Bani Abd ad-Dar are the ones that had the honor of carrying the keys to the Kaaba. That's why they're called Bani Abd ad-Dar. Abd ad-Dar, the dar, right? The house, right? So Uthman ibn Talha radiallahu anhu comes from the tribe that are key holders of the Kaaba, which is a great honor. And when you think of it, the Prophet ﷺ has a famous hadith when they show up. What does he say to the companions before they come? قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ قُرَيْشٌ. Quraysh has brought you the best of men. The best of the three men. And one is the politician and the diplomat. One is the most senior army general strategist. And the third is the one that carries the keys to the Kaaba. Like you see the whole situation flip on its head. SubhanAllah, when we talk about the Syria thing, like think about it. Israeli intelligence last week was shocked at how easy the army fell apart, the defenses fell apart. Completely shocked out of their minds. We know everything, we track everything, we get shocked out of their minds, right? Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us victory. And so this is, he is the third person that goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one last one that we'll just talk about. Inshallah, this is the end. Is the so we talked about the situation where Amr ibn al-As was changed by Najashi. Can anyone think of a companion that we covered recently that was also changed by another king? Started to at least think about it. Abu Sufyan with who? Heraclius, right? When he gets a letter, because he walks out, Abu Sufyan says that the matter of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like it's shaking, like what's going on? Even the king of the Bani al-Asfar, he called them the sons of the blondes, right? Is changing his mind. Let's wrap up, inshallah. Resume next week. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم في العالمين انك حميد مجيد. اللهم انصر اهل سوريا يا رب العالمين. اللهم ثبتهم وانزل عليهم الامان يا ارحم الراحمين. اللهم وحد صفهم يا ارحم الراحمين. اللهم اغفر لكل من مات منهم واحسبهم في عداد الشهداء. اللهم فرج همهم يا رب العالمين. اللهم انزل عليهم السكينه يا ارحم الراحمين. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وانت خير الغافرين. واخر دعوانا ان الحمد لله رب العالمين. Jazakumullah khair. I'll see you next week, and I will not take the cake back. So figure out who's going to eat that. Okay. Habibi, how are you? Good to see you, Habibi. My wife and daughter already went to math. That's why